Chapter 3: Shifting Foundations. 1 week into their exile, the spring rains had intensified. The forest transformed with the downpour. Vibrant greens deepened to emerald. The rich, earthy scent of humus rose from the forest floor, and normally tranquil streams swelled to urgent torrents. Water seeped through gaps in the bark roof of Odell and Bailey's shelter, forming persistent puddles on the earthen floor. The damp crept into everything: their food stores, their sleeping furs, even their bones. Their shelter, a hastily constructed lean-to reinforced with woven branches, had served adequately during the first dry days. Now it stood as a monument to their compromised design. Bailey's structured framework, coupled with Odell's improvised reinforcements. Neither fully satisfied with the result, they had nonetheless achieved a functional dwelling. Until the rains came. Inside the makeshift dwelling, Odell paced restlessly, his footsteps squishing in the increasingly sodden ground. The confined space magnified his movement, creating a rhythmic counterpoint to the drumming rain. Bailey sat cross-legged on a raised platform of branches she constructed to keep her work surface dry, sketching plans for a more permanent structure on flattened bark. "We need sturdier support posts," she murmured, her charcoal stick moving with practiced precision. "At least 6, arranged in a hexagonal pattern for optimal stability. The roof pitch should be steeper to encourage better water runoff." The plans were meticulous, demonstrating an understanding of engineering principles passed down through generations of tribal builders. Outside, a woodpecker's staccato drumming competed with the rainfall, the sound echoing through the forest like distant tribal signals. The pond they had camped beside had swollen, encroaching on their campsite, forcing them to move their fire pit twice already. Odell paused his pacing to push aside the woven grass door covering, staring out at the deluge. The world beyond their shelter had transformed into a watercolor painting, all distinct boundaries blurred by sheets of falling rain. His keen eyes tracked the movement of a fox darting between sheltered spaces across the clearing, its red coat darkened to russet by the wet. "The rain will continue for at least 2 more days," he said, letting the door covering fall back into place. Water dripped from his hair where he'd momentarily exposed himself to the elements. The frogs started their deep croaking pattern last night, always a sign of extended rainfall. Bailey glanced up briefly from her plans. "All the more reason to improve our situation now, while we still have dry materials to work with." A sudden gust of wind rattled their shelter, sending a fresh trickle of water down one of the support poles. Odell caught the drops in a wooden bowl they'd carved during the first days of exile. The container was already half full, a testament to the shelter's inadequacy. "What we need is to find that natural overhang I mentioned yesterday," Odell said, resuming his pacing. "It would have saved us all this trouble." He gestured to the increasingly soggy interior. "It's less than an hour's walk northwest, a limestone outcropping with a perfect natural shelter beneath it. Bailey sighed, setting down her charcoal stick. Her fingertips were stained black from her work, creating a stark contrast against the pale bark. We've been through this. A cave could collapse. Animals might already inhabit it. A properly constructed shelter with reinforced. "Oh, spare me the lecture," Odell interrupted, spinning to face her. His frustration, contained for days, finally surfaced. "Your endless planning won't stop the rain. It won't dry our food. It won't keep us warm tonight." He gestured to her detailed drawings. "That shelter won't exist until tomorrow at the earliest, and that's if the rain stops now." They glared at each other, their week of uneasy cooperation dissolving in the face of enforced proximity and miserable conditions. The argument might have escalated further if not for a sudden gust of wind that tore away a section of their roof, sending a cascade of rainwater onto Bailey's carefully drawn plans. She leapt to her feet with a cry of dismay as the charcoal lines blurred before her eyes, a week's worth of observational notes and careful measurements dissolving into indecipherable smudges. The bark itself began to curl at the edges as it absorbed the water, further destroying her work. "Now look what you've done," she accused, futilely trying to save her drawings. "Me?" Odell retorted, voice rising to match hers. "I didn't summon the wind." As they argued, neither noticed the small stream of water beginning to flow beneath their feet, undermining the shelter's foundation. The ground, already saturated from days of rainfall, could no longer absorb the water. Instead, it began to channel it, creating rivulets that snaked through their living space, carrying away small pebbles and debris, and with them, the stability of the ground beneath their shelter. A low, ominous creak interrupted their argument. They froze, eyes meeting in sudden understanding. Before either could move, a groaning sound emanated from the shelter's main support post. The rain-softened earth could no longer anchor it securely. "Move!" Odell shouted, grabbing Bailey's arm and yanking her toward the entrance, just as a supporting pole cracked with a sound like a small tree breaking. They tumbled outside into the full fury of the storm, breathless and stunned as their week's work collapsed behind them in a tangle of branches, hides, and muddied earth. For a moment, they stood in shocked silence, rain plastering their hair to their skulls, watching their shelter disintegrate. A small cooking pot rolled out from the wreckage, coming to rest at Bailey's feet like a forlorn messenger. Then, inexplicably, Odell began to laugh. It started as a chuckle, but quickly grew into full-bodied mirth that bent him double, hands on his knees, water streaming down his face, indistinguishable from tears. "This isn't amusing," Bailey protested, though the corner of her mouth twitched traitorously. "We spent days arguing over every detail of shelter that couldn't even survive one proper storm," Odell said between laughs. "Maybe the universe is trying to tell us something." A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, their collapsed shelter, their drenched forms standing helplessly in the downpour, and the absurdity of their situation. Despite herself, Bailey felt her lips twitch further. A small, reluctant chuckle escaped her. "We need to find immediate shelter," she said, struggling to maintain her serious demeanor as another laugh threatened to break free. Rain coursed down her face, washing away the last of the charcoal that had smudged her fingers and cheeks. Odell nodded, suddenly all business despite the smile that still played around his lips. The overhang I mentioned, it's not far. The terrain rises in that direction. He pointed northwest, which means less flooding risk. For once, Bailey didn't argue. Lead the way. They gathered what supplies they could salvage quickly, prioritizing the essentials: fire-starting kit, hunting knives, remaining dried food, and a single sleeping for each. The rest would have to wait until the storm passed. Hidden among the storm-lashed trees, Natalia watched from beneath an improvised rain cover, furiously documenting the interaction in her water-resistant journal. Note the immediate shift from conflict to cooperation under external pressure, she wrote, her handwriting less precise than usual due to the challenging conditions. Bailey defers to Odell's knowledge of terrain when primary systems fail. First observed instance of true complementary function rather than competitive opposition. Peg huddled beside her, eyes narrowed against the driving rain. They learn faster than expected, she murmured. The storm forces growth that fair weather would not. Odell and Bailey fought their way through the forest, heads bent against the driving rain. The path Odell chose wound through the tallest trees, where the dense canopy provided some minimal shelter from the worst of the downpour. Even so, rivulets of water ran down their backs, then soaked through their clothing. The landscape changed as they moved northwest, the ground rising gradually, the vegetation shifting to more drought-resistant species adapted to the rockier soil. Ancient pines towered overhead, their needled branches offering better protection from the rain than the broad leaves they'd left behind. The forest floor became increasingly rocky, with exposed roots creating natural steps up the incline. Bailey noted how Odell navigated these obstacles with unconscious grace, his body finding a path of least resistance as naturally as water flowing downhill. She tried to memorize his route, recognizing the efficiency of his movements. By the time they reached the rocky hillside where Odell had spotted the overhang, both were shivering violently. The rain had penetrated every layer of clothing, and the wind cut through their wet garments with knife-like precision. The overhang proved better than either had hoped, not just a rock shelf, but a shallow cave that extended back into the hillside. The interior remained dry, protected from the driving rain by the stone lip that extended several feet beyond the entrance. The floor consisted of fine gravel and sand rather than mud, and the ceiling rose high enough for them to stand comfortably. "How did you know this was here?" Bailey asked, her voice echoing slightly in stone space. Odell shrugged, dropping his salvage supplies near the cave entrance. "Saw it while tracking a deer 3 days ago. I make mental maps of useful features in any territory." Bailey sank to the ground just inside the entrance, exhaustion overwhelming her. Her limbs felt leaden. An alarming numbness had spread through her extremities. The combination of cold, exertion, and the emotional toll of losing their shelter had drained her completely. "We need to get out of these wet clothes," Odell said, rummaging through their supplies for anything dry. His tone was matter-of-fact, practical rather than suggestive. "And build a fire fast." They turned their backs to each other, stripping off sodden garments and wrapping themselves in the few dry hides they'd managed to keep in waterproof pouches. Bailey's movements were slower than usual, her fingers clumsy with cold as she struggled with the ties on her tunic. Odell set to work creating a fire, using a technique Bailey hadn't seen before. He created a small platform of the driest sticks he could find, elevating it slightly above the cave floor. On this, he placed a carefully arranged pyramid of tinder, not the usual dry grasses, but what appeared to be the fluff from some type of seed pod, which he produced from a waterproof pouch. Despite the damp conditions, he managed to coax a spark in a flame, using a striking stone against a piece of flint. As the small fire grew, casting a warm glow over the cave interior, Bailey found herself studying Odell with new eyes. His movements held a fluid grace she hadn't acknowledged before, an instinctive understanding of materials and elements. Each action had purpose, each placement of additional fuel deliberate and effective. "Where did you learn that technique?" she asked, drawing closer to the growing warmth. Odell glanced up, surprised by her interest. "I developed it during a long rain 3 summers ago, when everything was too wet for traditional methods." He fed the small flame carefully, gradually adding larger sticks as the fire established itself. "You improvised it yourself?" He nodded. "Had to. No one else was around to show me." He looked up, meeting her eyes. The traditional fire-starting methods rely on perfectly dry conditions. I needed something that would work when nothing was dry. This simple statement hinted at a deeper isolation than Bailey had considered, how his orphan status had forced him to rely on his own resources rather than inherited tribal knowledge. Without family to teach him, he had developed his own solutions to survival challenges.